Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. I was placed in an empty semi-private room after passing out during the X-ray. It was around 10 o'clock at night. As they helped me into bed, I remembered how freezing the hospital floor was. I had worn flip-flops to the hospital, so my feet were bare, and I couldn't believe how cold the floor in the hospital room was. I was particularly struck by how unclean my feet were. It stuck with me ever since. In my hospital bed, I was alone. With the lights off, it was very dark and everything was silent for the night. I was having difficulty falling asleep. I was tossing and turning in my bed. My hand was bandaged. I had an antibiotic IV flowing, and I felt like I was going to pass out again, like if I had been on an X-ray. So because I didn't like the experience, I decided to try to fight it. I knew I couldn't fall down again, but this spinning, dizzy sensation wasn't pleasant. I rolled onto my left side, gripping the bed rail. I believed I was done swooning when the sensation passed. When I flipped onto my back, I realized I was no longer in my body. My first impression was unusual. I couldn't feel anything in my body, but I knew I wasn't paralyzed. I sat up and felt as though I were passing through a warm gel wall. I'm not sure how to put it. Really strange, as in thick, heated shampoo. It wasn't dry or a liquid. It felt like both at the same time. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, feeling no pain. It was at this point that I noticed the hospital floor was no longer cold. I couldn't feel what the temperature of the floor was. I could see my body on the bed, but I wasn't scared of it or bothered by the fact that I was outside of it. It was the same experience as getting out of your car. It's there, it's parked, and you've forgotten about it. I wasn't concerned at all. It wasn't frightening, and I never worried about it. The chamber began to expand at the time. It became bigger and altered. The curtain that had once hung from the ceiling of my hospital room was no longer on a rack to my left and ahead of me. It was as though a time warp had happened. A bright yellow lung machine appeared on the far wall, and the window in the wall had grown in size as well. It seemed like a scene from a 1940s film, yet nothing about it struck me at the moment. Everything was merely accepted as normal. Nothing I witnessed was ever terrifying or disturbing. I was alone in my hospital room when a man appeared in front of me. He was wearing a hospital gown and had his back to me. Fortunately, I couldn't see the back of it. He appeared to be older, in his late 60s, and I didn't recognize him. I never questioned his presence in my room. Then everything turned completely dark. I recall never being afraid at the darkest places I've ever been. I was knocked out cold. I simply assumed that everything had gone dark. I recall holding my hand in front of my face to see if I could see it, but I couldn't. I knew I was still standing and that I had not left my hospital room. I hadn't even moved from the edge of the bed. However, everything was pitch black. The word room is incorrect. It's a location. I could see it was massive and yet so close. It was deafeningly quiet. There was no noise and there was nothing in there with me. Nothing seemed wrong with me. It had all the pomp and circumstance of waiting for the school bus or my mother to fetch me up. It wasn't frightening and I wasn't concerned. I was thinking of the school kids on the playground who used to mock me for not being baptized and tell me I was going to hell because I wasn't baptized like them. God? I wondered. This is when the door appeared. A slightly ajar door opened in the dark. It was roughly 500 feet away. And the second I thought about going to the door, I was at the door. I felt like I was walking into my own house as I reached for the doorknob. I didn't wonder why the door was there. It was pleasant and friendly, and I felt at home. When I opened the door, the room was completely white. The first thing I noticed was the lack of a seam where the floor met the wall. That struck me as strange. I followed my gaze ostensibly to the corner. but there was no sharp edge or corner. Then I began to glance up the wall, seeking for the seam where the walls met, but there was none. I was quite young and had never seen anything like that before, and as I raised my head to look up the wall, I saw the heaven ceiling. It was a blue sky, as vast and magnificent as the sky above us, but brighter and more vibrant. I've never seen such a sky before or since. It was enormous. This is huge. We don't have the right words to convey it. It was now as huge as the sky above your head. It was enormous. There were lovely fluffy clouds and birds, and when I looked around, I discovered it was surrounded by crown molding. As my gaze followed the scrolling's brilliance, I noticed it was supported by a big beam with a carousel carving on it, as in the pole that runs through the horse you're riding. Again, there was no fear, no doubt about where I was, and I simply embraced all I was seeing and experiencing. I had no idea I had arrived in heaven. The masculine angel appeared at this point. Everything after this is psychic communication. They never spoke in the same way that we do. It was all in my head. I was acutely aware of every word and nuance, gesture, and emotion. He didn't fly in. He didn't walk in. He didn't poof into the room. He didn't have any wings at all. He was dressed as if he were from my neighborhood. He was quite attractive. He reminded me of a boy from my school. He was tall, blonde, and gruff in appearance. He was dressed in a red flannel shirt with a white undershirt coming out from beneath, 501 Levi pants, and black Converse high-top sneakers. Of course, this struck me as unusual because everyone else was wearing white Reebok high tops at the time, and I thought this fashion decision was out of place. He smirked and asked, "Do you want to stay? Or would you like to go?" And I felt like I had all the time in the world to make my decision. I immediately thought of my mother. I was thinking about my mother at the time. I saw her in our living room, on the phone, getting word from my father that I was coding, and they were doing everything they could. My father discovered me dead in my bed. I could sense my mother's anxiety and pain at the prospect of losing me. It made me worried that if I stayed in paradise, she would be upset. If I stayed, would I miss my mother too much? And if I stayed in paradise, would I get in trouble with her? As I was mulling on the thought, a female angel appeared. She was blonde, shorter than me, and wearing a yellow dress. She also lacked wings. I didn't understand I was conversing with angels at first. Then she added, "You don't have to worry about that. Your connection with your mother will alter later on." And I had no more worries about what my mother thought or felt about my decision. And the scene of her on the phone with my father ended. I had no idea where I was, who I was talking to, or what was going on at this point. I wasn't perplexed either. Everything was simply accepted as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I was debating whether to stay here with these folks or return to my life on Earth. Something strange began to happen at this point. I had the impression of being two people at the same time. Not like my soul was ripped apart or anything. I appeared out of nowhere. At the same moment, there was another me. The previous self was wiser, older, and knew things I didn't. It's what I term flying control, because they act as the control tower. It's difficult to put into words. The part of me that was debating whether to stay or leave, and the part of me that was already there. I knew that part was going to be long-term, therefore I never left this spot. It's difficult to describe or explain. As the angel, who did not want me to return to Earth, shouted against my return, the other half of me responded with reasons to return. I still need my son, I reasoned, and I realized instantly that having my son was part of my life's purpose. Being his mother and raising him was one of my life's objectives. Nothing about his father or anything, just that I had to have my son and raise him. And I knew it was much later in my life, in my 30s. I stuck a pin in it. "Your life will always be a battle," the angel stated. That made no sense to me. I'm just 17 and don't have a brain, so my first thought or question was, for food? Shelter? And there was no answer. But I knew the struggle wasn't about money, food, or anything else material. It was about something more, and it was coming soon. The angel then told me, there are decisions you can make that will cost your soul. And once again, I had no idea what that meant. Zero. War was shown to me by the angel while I stood there puzzled. In this video, I was older and on Earth. I was considerably older, my current age, and jogging with a group of people headed by a soldier. However, I couldn't locate the uniform he was wearing. It was khaki in hue, and our soldiers in the United States wore green fatigues. As a result, that made no sense. I realized the guy had a rifle, and we all ran for cover. I could see the smoke, hear the bullets being fired, and see the sandbags and block walls that we were fleeing for. The soldier was also wearing a square backpack, which reminded me of World War I soldiers, but it was very square and not rounded at the corners, which was strange. The scene then ended. This female angel who had shown me everything was being blocked by someone I couldn't see or hear. They were talking, and I knew it had something to do with my free will if she showed me anything else. The individual who arrived never showed up. The woman I was speaking with was now standing in front of a very long sheet hung on a clothesline. I could only see around 80 people behind her a short distance away, but I knew they were there to greet me. And I had the impression from her that we had known each other for eons, not just years or decades, but eons, before the planet was formed, and she had my best interests at heart. Then the other part of me came up and said, I have a lot of work to do. And my initial thought was, digging ditches? Suddenly, I agreed that I did have a lot of work to accomplish on Earth, even though I had no idea what that work was. And then I felt a falling sensation and was smashed into my hospital bed with enormous force. My father had a firm grip on my foot and a worried expression on his face. A look I would not wish on any parent, a look I'd never seen before or since. Yet my father was a Pearl Harbor survivor during World War II. Welcome back, the nurse said. He'll be fine, she murmured, looking at my father and then at me, and started peeling the stickers off of me. I've been thinking about this event for years. My wrath toward my sister, which had caused us to fight all the time, was gone. We didn't fight again. I never told my father about my near-death experience. I didn't believe he'd believe me. He passed away in 1997. I never told my fiancée, who was killed in cold blood 5 months after we were engaged in 1990. I didn't think he'd believe me because he was religious. That was the challenge the angel was attempting to describe to me. The agony of heartbreak. What choices could I make that would cost me my soul? My son was born in 1998 when I was 34 years old. My son is now 23 and works as an EMT. I also told both of my children about my NDE. Other things have come true as a result of my NDE. My relationship with my mother shifted. We no longer communicate. She's distraught and in the care of my sister. When I was 40 years old, I told my mother about my NDE. She said that the work I needed to do was spiritual. What about the war? That is yet to be determined, but I know I'll die from it. After seeing that war scene, I saw no more of my life. I believe I was hit, but only time will tell.